Section 2 of the Rover, Volume 1, Number 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Rover, Volume 1, Number 2, edited by Seba Smith and Lawrence Labree. Section 2. The Ghost by J.K. Paulding. Sometime in the year 1800 or 1801, I'm not certain which, a man by the name of William Morgan, I don't mean the man whose abduction has made so much noise in the world, enlisted on board the United States frigate for a 3 years' cruise in the Mediterranean. He was an awful-looking person, 6 feet 4 inches high, a long pale visage, deeply furrowed with wrinkles, sunken eyes far up towards his forehead, black exuberant hair standing on end as if he was always frightened at something, a sharp chin of a length proportioned to his height, teeth white but very irregular, and the color of his eyes, what the writers on supernatural affairs call very singular and mysterious. Besides this, his voice was hollow and sepulchral. On his right arm were engraved certain mysterious devices, surmounted with the letters E.M., and his tobacco box was of iron. His everyday dress was a canvas hat with a black ribbon band, a blue jacket, white trousers, and leather shoes. On Sundays he wore a white beaver, which, among sailors, bespoke something extraordinary, and on rainy days a pea-jacket too short by half a yard. It is worthy of remark that Morgan entered on Friday, that the frigate was launched on Friday, that the master carpenter who built her was born on Friday. All these singular coincidences, combined with his mysterious appearance, caused the sailors to look upon Morgan with some little degree of wonder. During the voyage to Gibraltar, Morgan's conduct served to increase the impression his appearance had made on the crew. He sometimes went without eating for several days together. At least no one ever saw him eat, and if he ever slept at all, it was without shutting his eyes or lying down, for his messmates, one and all, swore that, wake at what time of the night they would, Morgan was seen sitting upright in his hammock, with his eyes glaring wide open. When his turn came to take his watch upon deck, his conduct was equally strange. He would stand stock-still in one place, gazing at the stars of the ocean, apparently unconscious of his situation, and when roused by his companions, fell flat on the deck in a swoon. When he revived, he would fall to preaching the most strange and incomprehensible rhapsodies that ever were heard. In their idle hours upon the forecastle, Morgan would tell such stories about himself and his strange escapes by sea and by land as caused the sailors' hair to stand on end, and made the jolly fellows look upon him as a person gifted with the privilege of living for ever. He often indeed hinted that he had as many lives as a cat, and more than once offered to let himself be hanged for the gratification of his messmates. On more than one occasion he was found lying on his back in his hammock, apparently without life, his eyes fixed and glowing, his limbs stiff and rigid, his lower jaw sunk down, and his pulse motionless, at least so his messmates swore when they went to call the doctor, though when the latter came he always found Morgan as well as ever he was in his life, and apparently unconscious of all that had happened. As they proceeded on the voyage, which proved for the most part a succession of calms, the sailors, having little else to do, either imagined or invented new wonders about Morgan. At one time a little Welsh fore-topman swore that as he was going to sit down to dinner, his canteen was snatched from under him by an invisible hand, and he fell plump on the deck. A second had his allowance of grog abducted in a mysterious manner, although he was ready to make oath he never had his eyes off it for a moment. A third had his tobacco box rifled, though it had never been out of his pocket. A fourth had a crooked sixpence, with a hole by which it was suspended from his neck by a ribbon, taken away without his ever being the wiser for it. These things at length reached the ears of Captain R., who, the next time Morgan got into one of his trances, had him confined for 24 hours, and otherwise punished him in various ways on the recurrence of any of these wonderful reports. All this produced no effect whatever, either on Morgan or the crew, which at length had its wonder stretched to the utmost bounds by a singular adventure of our hero. One day, the squadron being about half-way across the Atlantic, and the frigate several leagues ahead with a fine breeze, there was an alarm of the magazine being on fire. Morgan was just coming on deck with a spoon in his hand, for some purpose or other, when hearing the cry of magazine on fire, he made one spring overboard. The fire was extinguished by the daring gallantry of an officer now living and standing in the first rank of our naval heroes. In the confusion and alarm, it was impossible to make any efforts to save Morgan, and it was considered a matter of course that he had perished in the ocean. 2 days after, one of the other vessels of the squadron came alongside of the frigate and sent a boat on board with Billy Morgan. 12 hours after his leap overboard, he had been found swimming away gallantly with the spoon in his hand. When asked why he did not let it go, he replied that he kept it to help himself to salt water when he was dry. This adventure fixed in the minds of the sailors an obstinate opinion that Morgan was either a dead man come to life again, or one that was not very easily to be killed. After this Morgan continued his mysterious pranks. The sailors talked and wondered at Captain R, punished him until the squadron were within 2 or 3 days' sail of Gibraltar, admitting the wind continued fair as it then was. Morgan had been punished pretty severely that morning for star-gazing and falling into a swoon on his watch the night before, and had solemnly assured his messmates that he intended to jump overboard and drown himself the first opportunity. He made his will, dressed himself in his best, and settled all his affairs. He also replenished his tobacco box, put his allowance of biscuit in his pocket, and filled a small canteen with water, which he strung about his neck, saying that perhaps he might take it into his head to live a day or two in the water before he finally went to the bottom. Between 12 and 1, the vessel being becalmed, the night a clear starlight, and the sentinels pacing their rounds, Morgan was distinctly seen to come up through the hatchway, walk forward, climb the bulwark, and let himself drop into the sea. A midshipman and 2 seamen testified to the facts, and Morgan being missing the next morning, there was no doubt of his having committed suicide by drowning himself. This affair occasioned much talk, and various were the opinions of the ship's crew on the subject. Some swore it was one Davy Jones who had been playing his pranks, others that it was no man but a ghost or devil that had got among them, and others were in daily expectation of seeing him come on board again as well as ever he was. In the meantime the squadron proceeded but slowly, being detained several days by calms and headwinds, most of which was in some way or other laid to Morgan by the gallant tars, who feared nothing but Fridays and men without heads. His fate, however, gradually ceased to be a subject of discussion, and the wonder was quickly passing away, when one night, about a week after his jumping overboard, the figure of Morgan, all pale and ghastly, his clothes hanging wet about him, with eyes more sunken, hair more upright, and face more thin and cadaverous than ever, was seen by one of his messmates, who happened to be lying awake, to emerge slowly from the forepart of the ship, approach one of the tables where there was a can of water, from which it took a hearty draught, and disappear in the direction whence it came. The sailor told the story next morning, but as yet very few believed him. The next night the same figure appeared, and was seen by a different person from him by whom it was first observed. It came from the same quarter again, helped itself to a drink, and disappeared in the same direction it had done before. The story of Morgan's ghost, in the course of a day or two, came to the ears of Captain R, who caused a search to be made in that part of the vessel whence the ghost had come, under the impression that the jumping overboard of Morgan had been a deception, and that he was now secreted on board the ship. The search ended, however, without any discovery. The calms and headwinds still continued, and not a sailor on board but ascribed them to Billy Morgan's mysterious influence. The ghost made its appearance again the following night after the search, when it was seen by another of Morgan's messmates to empty his tobacco box and seize some of the fragments of supper which had been accidentally left on a table, with which it again vanished in the manner before described. The sailor swore that when the ghost made free with his tobacco box, he attempted to lay hold of him, but felt nothing in his hand but something exactly like cold water. Captain R was excessively provoked at these stories, and caused another and still more thorough search to be made, but without any discovery. He then directed a young midshipman to keep watch between decks. That night the ghost again made its appearance, and the courageous young officer sallied out upon it, but the figure darted away with inconceivable velocity and disappeared. The midshipman, as directed, immediately informed Captain R, who instituted an immediate search, but with as little success as before. By this time there was not one sailor on board that was not afraid of his shadow, and even the officers began to be infected with a superstitious dread. At length the squadron arrived at Gibraltar, and came to in the bay of Algeciras, where the ships remained some days waiting the arrival of those they had come to relieve. About the usual hour that night the ghost of Billy Morgan again appeared to one of his messmates, offered him its hand, and saying, "Good bye, Tom," disappeared as usual. It was a fortnight or more before the squadron sailed up the Mediterranean, during which time the crews of the ships were permitted to take their time to go on shore. On one of these occasions a messmate of Billy Morgan, named Tom Brown, was passing through a tolerably dark lane in the suburbs of Algeciras, when he heard a well-known voice call out, "Tom, Tom, darn your eyes, don't you know your old messmate?" Tom knew the voice, and looking round recognized his old messmate Morgan's ghost, but he had no inclination to renew the acquaintance. He took to his heels, and without looking behind him to see if the ghost followed, ran to the boat where his companions were waiting, and told the story as soon as he could find breath for the purpose. This reached the ear of Captain R., who, being almost sure of the existence of Morgan, applied to the governor of the town, who caused search to be made everywhere without effect. No one had ever seen such a person. That very night the ghost made its appearance on board the frigate, and passed its cold wet hand over the face of Tom Brown, to whom Morgan had left his watch and chest of clothes. The poor fellow bawled out lustily, but before any pursuit could be made the ghost had disappeared in the forward part of the ship as usual. After this Billy again appeared 2 or 3 times alternately to some one of his messmates, sometimes in the town, at others on board the frigate, but always in the dead of night. He seemed desirous to say something particular, but could never succeed in getting any of the sailors to listen quietly to the communication. The last time he made his appearance at Algeciras on board the frigate, he was heard by one of the sailors to utter in a low, hollow whisper, "You shall see me at Malta," after which he vanished as before. Captain R. was excessively perplexed at these strange and unaccountable visitations, and instituted every possible inquiry into the circumstances, in the hope of finding some other clue to explain the mystery. He again caused the ship to be examined, with a view to the discovery either of the place where Morgan secreted himself, or the means by which he escaped from the vessel. He questioned every man on board, and threatened the severest punishment should he ever discover that they deceived him in their story, or were accomplices to the escape of Morgan. He even removed everything in the forward part of the ship, and rendered it impossible for any human being to be there without being detected. The whole resulted in leaving the affair in complete mystery, and the squadron proceeded up the Mediterranean to cruise along the African coast and rendezvous at Malta. It was some weeks before the frigate came to the latter place, and in the meantime, as nothing had been seen of the ghost, it was concluded that the shade of Billy Morgan was appeased, or rather the whole affair had been gradually forgotten. 2 nights after her arrival, a party of sailors being ashore at La Valette, accidentally entered a small tavern in a remote part of the suburbs, where they commenced a frolic after the manner of those amphibious bipeds. Among them was the heir of Billy Morgan, who, about 3 or 4 in the morning, went to bed, not quite so clear-headed as he might have been. He could not tell how long he had been asleep when he was awakened by a voice whispering in his ear, "Tom, Tom, wake up." On opening his eyes, he beheld by the pale light of the morning the ghastly figure of Billy Morgan leaning over his bed and glaring at him with eyes like saucers. Tom cried, "Murder! Ghost! Billy Morgan!" as loud as he could bawl, until he roused the landlord, who came to know what was the matter. Tom related the whole affair, and inquired if he had seen anything of the figure he described. Mine host utterly denied having ever seen or ever heard of such a figure as Billy Morgan, and so did all his family. The report was again alive on board the frigate that Billy Morgan's ghost had taken the field again. "Heaven and earth!" cried Captain R. "Is Billy Morgan's ghost come again? Shall I never get rid of this infernal spectre, or whatever else it may be?" Captain R. immediately ordered his barge, waited on the governor, explained the situation of his crew, and begged his assistance in apprehending the ghost of Billy Morgan, or Billy himself, as the case might be. That night the governor caused the strictest search to be made in every hole and corner of the little town of La Valette, but in vain. No one had seen that remarkable being, corporeal or spiritual, and the landlord of the house where the spectre appeared, together with all his family, utterly denied any knowledge of such a person or thing. It is little to be wondered at that the search proved ineffectual, for that very night Billy took a fancy to appear on board the frigate, where he again accosted his old friend Tom, to whom he had bequeathed all his goods and chattels. But Tom had no mind for a confidential communication with the ghost, and roared out lustily, as usual, that it glided away and disappeared as before, without being intercepted in the confusion which followed. Captain R. was in despair. Never was man so persecuted by a ghost in this world before. The ship's crew were in a state of terror and dismay, insomuch that had an Algerine come across them, they might peradventure have surrendered at discretion. They signed a round robin, drawn up by one of Billy Morgan's old messmates, representing to Captain R. the propriety of running the ship ashore, and abandoning her entirely to the ghost, which now appeared almost every night, sometimes between decks, at others on the end of the bowsprit, and at others cutting capers on the yards and topgallant masts. The story spread into the town of La Valette, and nothing was talked of but the ghost of Billy Morgan, which now began to appear occasionally to the sentinels of the fort, one of whom had the courage to fire at it, by which he alarmed the whole island, and made matters 10 times worse than ever. From Malta the squadron, after making a cruise of a few weeks, proceeded to Syracuse, with the intention of remaining some time. They were obliged to perform a long quarantine. The ships were strictly examined by the health officers, and fumigated with brimstone, to the great satisfaction of the crew of the frigate, who were in great hopes this would drive away Billy Morgan's ghost. These hopes were strengthened by their seeing no more of that troublesome visitor during the whole time quarantine continued. The very next night after the expiration of the quarantine, Billy again visited his old messmate and heir, Tom Brown, lank, lean, and dripping wet as usual, and after giving him a rousing shake, whispered, "Hush, Tom, I want to speak to you about my watch and chest of clothes." But Tom had no inclination to converse with his old friend, and cried out "Murder!" with all his might, when the ghost vanished as before, muttering, as Tom swore, "You bloody infernal lubber." The reappearance of the ghost occasioned greater consternation than ever among the crew of the good ship, and it required all the influence of severe punishment to keep them from deserting on every occasion. Poor Tom Brown, to whom the devoir of the spectre seemed most especially directed, left off swearing and chewing tobacco, and dwindled to a perfect shadow. He became very serious, and spent almost all his leisure time in reading chapters in the Bible or singing psalms. Captain R. now ordered a constant watch all night between decks in hopes of detecting the intruder, but all in vain, although there was hardly a night passed without Tom waking and crying out that the ghost had just paid him a visit. It was, however, thought very singular, and to afford additional proof of its being a ghost, that on all occasions except 2, it was invisible to everybody but Tom Brown. In addition to the vexation arising from this persevering and diabolical persecution of Billy's ghost, various other strange and unaccountable things happened almost every day on board the frigate. Tobacco boxes were emptied in the most mysterious manner, and in the dead of the night. Sailors would sometimes be missing a whole day, and return again without being able to give an account of themselves, and not a few of them were overtaken with liquor, without their being ever the wiser for it, for they all swore they had not drunk a drop beyond their allowance. Sometimes, on going ashore and leave for a limited time, the sailors would be decoyed, as they solemnly assured the captain, by some unaccountable influence, into strange out of the way places, where they could not find their road back, and where they were found by their officers in a state of mysterious stupefaction, though not one had tasted a drop of liquor. On these occasions they always saw the ghost of Billy Morgan, either flying through the air, or dancing on the tops of the steeples with a fiery tail like a comet. Wonder grew upon wonder every day, until the wonder transcended the bounds of human credulity. At length Tom Brown, the night after receiving a visit from Billy Morgan's ghost, disappeared, and was never heard of afterward. As the chest of clothes inherited from his deceased messmate was found entirely empty, it might have been surmised that Tom had deserted, had not a sailor who was on the watch solemnly declared that he saw the ghost of Billy Morgan jump overboard with him in a flame of fire, and that they hissed like a red-hot plowshare in the water. After this bold feat, the spectre appeared no more. The squadron remained some time at Syracuse, and various adventures befell the officers and crews, which those remaining alive tell to this day. How Macdonough, then a madcap midshipman, licked the high constable of the town; how Burrows quizzed the governor; what rows they kicked up at masquerades, and what wonders they whispered in the ears of Dionysius. From thence they again sailed on a cruise, and after teaching the Bey of Tripoli a new way of paying tribute, and laying the foundation of that structure of imperishable glory which shall one day reach the highest heaven, returned home after an absence of between 2 and 3 years. The crew of the frigate were paid off and discharged, and it is on record as a wonder that their 3 years' pay lasted some of them nearly 3 days. But though we believe in the ghost of Billy Morgan, we can scarcely credit this incredible wonder. Certain it is that not a man of them ever doubted for a moment the reality of the spectre, or would have hesitated to make oath to having seen it more than once. Even Captain R. spoke of it on his return as one of those strange inscrutable things which baffle the efforts of human ingenuity, and seem to justify the most extraordinary relations of past and present times. His understanding revolted at the absurdity of a great part of the wonders ascribed to Billy Morgan's ghost, but some of the facts were so well attested that a painful doubt would often pass over his mind, giving him superstitious impressions. He remained in this state of mixed skepticism and credulity when, some years after his return from the Mediterranean, being on a journey to the westward, he had occasion to halt at a log house on the borders of Tennessee for refreshment. A man came forth to receive him, whom he at once recognized as his old acquaintance Billy Morgan. Heavens, thought Captain R., here's Monsieur Tonson come again. Billy, who had also found out who his guest was when too late to retreat, looked rather sheepish and invited him in with little of the frank hospitality characteristic of a genuine backwoodsman. Captain R. followed him into the house, where he found a comely, good-natured dame and 2 or 3 yellow-haired boys and girls, all in a fluster at the stranger. The house had an air of comfort, and the mistress, by her stirring activity, accompanied with smiling looks withal, seemed pleased at the rare accident of a stranger entering their door. Billy Morgan was at first rather shy and awkward, but finding Captain R. treated him with good-humored frankness, he, in the course of the evening, when the children were gone to bed and the wife busy in milking the cows, took occasion to accost his old commander. "Captain, I hope you don't mean to shoot me for a deserter?" "By no means," said the captain, smiling. "There would be little use in shooting a ghost, or a man with as many lives as a cat." Billy Morgan smiled a rather melancholy smile. "Ah, captain, you have not forgotten the ghost, I see. But it is a long time to remember an old score, and I hope you'll forgive me." "On one condition I will," replied Captain R., "that you tell me honestly how you managed to make all my sailors believe they saw you, night after night, on board the ship as well as on shore." "They did see me," replied Billy, in his usual sepulchral voice, the captain again to be in some doubt whether he was talking to Billy Morgan or his ghost. "You don't pretend to say you were really on board my vessel all the time?" "No, not all the time, only at such times as the sailors saw me, except previous to our arrival at Gibraltar." "Then their seeing you jump overboard was all a deception?" "By no means, sir. I did jump overboard, but then I climbed back again directly after." "The deuce you did! Explain." "I will, sir, as well as I am able. I was many years among the Sandwich Islanders, where the vessel in which I was a cabin boy was wrecked a long time ago, and I can pass whole hours, I believe days, in the water, without being fatigued except for want of sleep. I have also got some of their other habits, such as a great dislike to hard work, and a liking for going where I will, and doing just what I please. The discipline of a man of war did not suit me at all, and I grew tired after a few days. To pass the time, and to make fun for myself with the sailors, I told them stories of my adventures, and pretended that I could live in the water, and had as many lives as a cat. Besides this, as you know, I played them many other pranks, partly from amusement, and partly from a kind of pride I felt in making them believe I was half a wizard. The punishment you gave me, though I own I deserved it, put me out of all patience, and I made up my mind to desert the very first opportunity. I had an old shipmate with me whom I could trust, and we planned the whole thing together. I knew if I deserted at Gibraltar, or any of the ports of the Mediterranean, I should almost certainly be caught and shot as an example, and for this purpose we settled that I should jump overboard, return again, and hide myself in a coil of cable which was stowed away between decks, close to the bows, where it was dark even in the daytime. My messmate procured a piece of old canvas with which I might cover myself, if necessary, to make my jumping overboard have a greater effect upon the crew, and to provide against accidents until the ship arrived at Gibraltar. I took care to fill my tobacco box with tobacco, my pockets with biscuits, and to sling a canteen of water round my neck, as I told them perhaps I might take it into my head to go to the bottom for 2 or 3 days. I got Tom Brown to write my will, intending to leave my watch and chest to my messmate, who was to return them to me at Gibraltar the first chance he could get. But Tom played us a trick and put his own name in the place of my friend's. Neither he nor I were any great scholars, and the trick was not found out until afterward, when my friend was afraid of discovery if he made any rout about the matter. "Who was your friend?" asked Captain R. "He is still alive, and in the service. I'd rather not mention his name." "Very well," replied Captain R. "Go on." "That night I jumped overboard." "How did you get back into the ship?" asked the captain hastily. "Why, sir, the forward porthole on the starboard side was left open with a bit of rope fastened to the gun, and hanging down so that I could catch it. As soon as I had jumped overboard, I swam to the rope, which I held fast, waiting the signal from my friend to climb up and hide myself in the coil of cable. In the bustle which followed it was easy enough to do this, and nobody saw me but my friend. Here I remained in my wet clothes rather uncomfortably, as you may suppose, until my provision and water were expended and my tobacco box empty. I calculated they would last till we arrived at Gibraltar, when nothing would have been easier for me than to jump out of the porthole and swim ashore. But the plaguy head winds and calms, which I dare say you remember, delayed the squadron several days longer than I expected, and left me without supply. I could have gone without biscuit and water, but it was impossible to live without tobacco. My friend promised to come near enough to hear signals of distress sometimes, but as he told me afterward, he was confined several days for picking a quarrel with Tom Brown, whom he longed to flog for forging the will. I remained in this state until I was nearly starved, when, not being able to stand it any longer, I one night, when everybody between decks seemed fast asleep, crept out from my hiding place, where I was coiled up in the shape of a cable, and finding a pitcher of water, took a hearty drink out of it. This was as far as I dared go at that time, so I went back again as quietly as possible, but I was too hungry to remain quiet, though among the Sandwich Islanders I had been used to go without eating for days at a time. The next night I crept out again, and was lucky enough to get a pretty good supply of provisions, which happened to be left by some accident in the way. 2 or 3 times I heard search making for me, and was very much frightened lest I should be found out in my hole. When we arrived at the Bay of Algeciras, I took an opportunity to frighten Tom Brown a little, by visiting him in the night and bidding him good bye, after which I slipped quietly out of the porthole, and swam ashore, while my friend pulled up the rope and shut the port after me. But how did you manage to escape from the search made by the police of Algeciras? Oh, sir, I was on board the frigate all the time, in my old hiding place, and when the ship was searched directly after, I was ashore at that time. And how did you manage at Malta? The landlord was my sworn brother, and would not have blabbed for £1,000. And the capers on the yard arm and top gallant, the visits paid to Tom Brown at Syracuse, and the wonderful stories told by the sailors of being robbed of their tobacco, getting tipsy upon nothing, and being led astray by nobody. What do you say to all that, Mr. Ghost? Said the captain, smiling. I never paid but 2 visits to the ship, so far as I remember, sir, after she left Malta. One was the night I wanted to talk to Tom Brown, the other when he disappeared the night afterward. The rest of the stories were all owing to the jokes of some of the sailors, and the fears of the others. But are you sure you did not jump into the sea with Tom Brown in a flame of fire? Yes, sir, as I am an honest man. Tom got away without any help of mine, and without my ever knowing how, until a long time afterward, when I accidentally met him at Liverpool. Well, he was not to be convinced I was living, but ran away as hard as he could, and to this day believes in ghosts as much as he does in being alive himself. So far all is clear enough, said Captain R., but what could possibly induce you to put yourself in the way of being caught after escaping by visiting the ship and letting yourself be seen? I wanted to see Tom Brown, sir. Why so? I wanted to get back my watch and clothes from him. Oh, I see it now. But had you no other object? Why, I'll tell you, sir. Besides that, I had a sort of foolish pride all my life in frightening people, and making them wonder at me, by telling tough stories or doing strange things. I haven't got over it to this day, and have been well beaten 2 or 3 times, besides being put in a jail for playing the ghost hereabouts with the country people at court time. I confess, too, sir, that I have once or twice frightened my wife almost into fits, by way of a frolic, and for all the trouble it has brought upon me, I believe in my soul I shall play the ghost till I give up the ghost at last. Besides this, the truth is, sir, I had a little spite at you for having put me in the bilboes for some of these pranks, as I deserved, and had no objection to pay you off by breeding trouble in the ship. Truly you succeeded wonderfully, but what became of you afterward? Why, sir, after Tom Brown deserted, and to quiet his conscience, left my watch and clothes to my friend, I had no motive for playing the ghost any more. I shipped in an American merchantman for Smyrna. From thence I went to Gibraltar, and after voyaging a year or 2, and having a few $100, came to Boston at last. I did not dare to stay along shore for fear of being known by some of the officers of the squadron, so I took my money and my bundle and went into the back country. I am a little of everything, a jack of all trades, and turned farmer, as sea captains often do when they are tired of ploughing the ocean. I get on pretty well now, and hope you won't have me shot by a court-martial. No, replied Captain R., I'm out of the navy now. I've turned farmer too, and you are quite safe. I hope you prosper well, sir. Not quite so well as you, Billy. I've come into the backwoods to see if I can do better. Only serve under me, said Billy, and I will repay all your good offices. What, the floggings, etc.? By God's help, sir, I may, said Billy. Try me, sir. No, I'm going a little further. You may go further, and fare worse, sir. Perhaps so, but I believe it is bedtime, and so good night, Mr. Ghost. The captain retired, and was so full of the adventures of Billy Morgan he could not sleep, though he had ridden 40 miles that day on horseback. It might be about 2 hours before daylight when he thought he heard a sort of low whispering under his window, which was on the ground floor, and all at once the loneliness of his situation came across his mind. If ever there was a man that looked suspicious, it was Billy Morgan, and if ever there was a spot where a traveller might be dispatched with impunity, it was this lonely retreat in the almost pathless forest. A thought also came across him that he had told Billy that he was come with a view to the purchase of land, and of course he must have money. At all events, no man could set out on journey of some thousands of miles without a few $100 to bear his expenses, Captain R. was a man of great resolution, but there are times and situations in which the apprehension of danger is 1,000 times more appalling than the reality. Indeed, we are persuaded from our own experience that imagination makes more cowards than all other causes put together. The captain tried to reason and then to bully these apprehensions into silence, but the whisperings continued, and at length he could distinguish the low hollow voice of Billy Morgan saying, "Hush, you'll wake the captain." "Shall I shoot him now?" replied someone in the same suppressed tone. "No," replied Billy, "you can't see him quite plain enough yet. You may miss him." "Well, if I do, you can try him afterward." "He'll run away." "I'll be darned if I do," thought Captain R., cautiously raising himself up in bed, and peeping out at the window which was just at his bedside. There was no moon, and the whole expanse of the heavens was veiled by light fleecy clouds, which entirely hid the stars, and caused an indistinct obscurity, through which objects could be perceived in the outline, but not in their distinct features. Crouching in a large plane tree, whose hollow trunk would have accommodated a troop of robbers, he distinguished two figures, cowering and stooping, as if to see some object in the distance. There he is," whispered one. "Fire." "Darn it," said Billy, in his low, deep tones, "he's dodged us this time. Look out again, and the very first glimpse you get of his eyes, fire away." Captain R. rose, dressed as briefly as possible, and arming himself with a pair of pistols he had brought with him, seated himself near the only door of his room, in a situation where he could not be seen without calmly awaiting the result. The more the appearance of danger assumed the part of reality, the more his courage rose to meet it. He had not sat thus for 5 minutes when he heard the two rifles fired in quick succession. A moment later the voice of Billy Morgan was distinguished. "We've done for the gentleman." "Not quite," thought Captain R., cocking his pistol and expecting a visit every moment. "I saw him drop," cried Billy's companion. "He has run away," answered Billy. "You lie, you scoundrel," muttered Captain R., in a violent passion, and sallying forth as he exclaimed, "I'll show you whether I've run away." He advanced boldly towards the two villains, who were now groping about among the neighboring bushes. At last one of them cried, "Oh, here's the gentleman, as dead as Julius Caesar. They'll never tell who did it, I reckon." "He's as fat as butter," said Billy. "It's not me, after all," thought Captain R., that they intended to murder some poor unfortunate fat gentleman who has lost his way in these woods. "Rascals!" cried he, rushing forward, "whom have you been murdering here?" "Only a bear, sir," cried the ghost of Billy Morgan. "He's been robbing my pig pen for some time past, but I think I've paid off all old scores now." Captain R. returned quietly to his room, went to bed, and slept like a top till the broad sun shone over the summits of the trees into his face as he lay under the window. He breakfasted sumptuously upon a steak of the fat gentleman, and set out gallantly for the prairies of St. Louis. "Good bye, Captain," said Billy, leering and lengthening his face to a supernatural degree. "I hope you won't be I mean murdered on your way." "Good bye, Billy," replied Captain R., a little nettled. "I hope you will not get into the state prison for playing the ghost." "I'll take care of that, sir. I've been in the state prison 3 years already, and you won't catch me there again, I warrant you." "What do you mean, Billy?" "I mean that there's little or no odds between stateship and state prison," said Billy, with a face longer than ever, and most expressive shrug. Captain R. proceeded on his way, reflecting on the singular story of Billy Morgan, whose pranks on board the frigate had convinced some hundreds of men of the existence of ghosts, and thrown the gloom of superstitious horror over the remainder of their existence. Not a sailor, thought he, out of more than 500, with the exception of a single one, but will go to his grave in the full belief in the appearance of Billy Morgan's ghost. What an unlucky rencontre this of mine! It has spoiled one of the most authenticated ghost stories of the age. End of Section 2.